And it's not good.
Yeah, no, it's okay. All right, so as I was talking to you about the context and that we had been, the language was actually a quite debatable issue in our country. So we had one in 1952, and then we had another one in 1971. In both cases, language was connected or related to our identity and power. In July 2024, we had sort of a repetition of event, this time once again a student movement, but this movement was actually not with anyone else but with the current government at that point. So this movement was a student uprising led by specifically Gen Z, and they were protesting the quota system in government jobs in Bangladesh that the government was trying to impose. But very soon it actually grew into a broader movement against authoritarianism. So it no longer stayed to just because of just a student movement against quota. All right. The reason behind this movement grew so big was actually the idea of the exclusivity and then this marginality that was the government trying to impose. So in Bangladesh, we had that autocratic government for the last 15 years. And all the strategy, one of the strategy they have been using all these years was actually just silencing or marginalizing people by using language as a tool of like social division. They used to frame the loyalists who were like agreeing to their agendas, they were the patriots, and those who were critics, they were the traitors. Okay, so they did one thing that they kind of reconnected or revived the concept that we used in 1971, the term Rajakar. At that point, the term was actually used as a collaborator, or in other words, traitor, who were against the liberation war. But now the government has used that specific term to alienate and kind of like disengage people or kind of suppress the the oppositions, to tell them that those students who are actually running this movement, they are against that. When they are the traitors, they are the Rajakars. So they are like hitting that sentiment and using the very same term that we used in 1971 when we had that liberation war. So as you can see, once again, the language became the political instrument that gave privilege to the loyalists and marginalized the critics. Okay, but language was not the only tool, of course. The government also tried to kind of like use silence as a way of weapon. That was also another weapon for them. They had their Digital Security Act. So whoever was not complying to this, they used to arrest them and then put them, criminalize the whole activity. And they had that media restriction, internet lockout, and all these things they were doing in those period of time. So yeah, that was another way of kind of controlling the voice. As you can see, they were trying not only to what you say, they're also trying to engineer the silence that the students were actually dealing with. With this backdrop, but as we said, this is about Gen Z movement, they were not quiet. They responded. And they responded how? They responded by mobilizing their plurilingual repertoire. So they interwove Bangla, English. Bangla is our national language, and then along with that English and Arabic, that comes from our religious background. It's a country of Muslims, the majority of Muslims. And we have a group of people who goes to madrasa school, and they specifically learn in Arabic. So they were interweaving all those languages, and they came up with memes, graffitis, chants, hashtags. So they kind of created, against the government's exclusivist agenda, they came up with an alternative, inclusive narrative that resonated both nationally and globally. Okay, so with this background, we actually wanted to see, as you can see on our screen, we have 3 research questions. We wanted to see how did Generation Z activists demobilize that plurilingual practices, including the hybrid language use, translanguaging practice they use, and discursive irony. They use all these linguistic practices as an act of political resistance and identity reimagination. And at the same time, we had 2 other questions like how or in what ways did symbolic and strategic silence function as part of a broader plurilingual linguistic repertoire? And as you can see, the third question, how did the regime's linguistic strategies, it's from the opposite, like the government side, how did they attempt to reinforce this monolingual nationalism to suppress the students? Okay, so we had, so while we were talking about it, we came up with two theoretical framework that we thought that could guide our study. One of them was the plurilingualism and then plurilanguaging, that framework. So the reason we drew on plurilingualism or plurilanguaging is because, as you can see, the way students were using their whole repertoire, they were blending and mixing, and so it's no longer what it was not. Language no longer was limited to means of communication. It became an active movement. So we found that the way students blended these three languages and dialects, they kind of became actually plurilingualism as praxis. So we found that it's very relevant to our study. And at the same time, we also talked about, as we can see that whole movement, we could see that the entire movement took a multilingual turn. We've been talking about multilingual turn for all these years. So this is how actually we were navigating this thing. Now I'm being mindful of time, and I'm handing over to Umme to discuss the methodology.
So for methodology, we use the digital ethnography, or we call ethnography. This is something kind of new that we have explored because this movement happened last year, and we were here in Canada, in Toronto, but we were religiously following all the digital platforms like Facebook, X, and also all the TV channels and all those kind of things. So we use those digital ethnography or ethnography, and also what we saw that we use the artifact, that is memes, chants, graffiti, hashtags, and strategies of silence. And so this was our methodological thing. And for analyzing the data, we used two frameworks basically. One was Fairclaw's 3D critical discourse analysis framework, and another one was GJEC's elite discourse and polarization framework. So by 3D critical discourse analysis model, we mean that we have text, and then we have interpretation of the text, and we have then the social practices. So what we have seen, all the texts, those were coming from all the protesters and also from the government side. So we saw them, and we also followed how those texts were interpreted in social media by different people in different platforms, and also in social, social netizens, all the people who are participating actively or indirectly. So we also followed their interpretation, how they are, so we included all of these in our research, and we came up to a conclusion. And then how was so as we said, our data was completely corpus analysis, like social posts, like text, image, video, and televised speeches, newspaper headlines, protest artifacts, all those kind of things. And for the triangulation of the, for the sake of the validity of the data, so what we have done, we did a triangulation because we cross the data across the platforms. We followed the same person maybe in Facebook and also in X, and also when he is giving a talk in a podcast or in a television. So we cross-checked the data. So that's how we validated our data. And regarding the ethical point of view, so we all use, because we were here and it was not possible, and it was a whole movement going out over there. So it was not possible for us to reach out and take any permission or research. So we used all the socially available data from different platforms. So that's how we validate it ethically from our point of view. And regarding the findings, so since we are talking about plurilingualism here in Canada, it might seem like it's nothing new, but in our part of the world where monolingualism is the tool, the main discourse, they're coming out of a plurilingualism. That's a big thing. So it's unprecedented, I should say. So our first finding was state monolinguals and polarizing frame. So the state is always monolingual, and they polarize by their own speeches and with their own weaponizing the language. And then what our finding too, as I said, that it was plurilingual counter discourse. So when government is imposing the monolingual tools, all the protesters and the common people, they are coming up with all those multilingual and plurilingual rapporteurs, because there was a huge gap that has been discovered by this movement, because the people who were in the policymaking, they are still in monolingual attitude. But because of the globalization, all the technology, the young Gen Z protesters, they have updated themselves in plurilingual rapporteurs. So that's a big change in Bangladeshi, socio-cultural political landscape. So that this revolution, expressed. And also our third finding was silence. So silence as a semiotic action that we try to term it. We also found that silence is a semiotic action, both government side, because beneficiaries and the student protesters and supporters use silence as a tool to serve their purpose. The government silences anti-government protesters, and the Facebook protesters make all their profile pictures color without saying anything. So silence was their one of their language. So it was used as a language, silence. Yeah, so can I be allowed just show 2 pictures maybe? I'm sorry about the time or the technology that has happened to us. So I don't know, like you have to go there. Yeah. So I can explain this picture if you have. So this is actually digital calendar page. You can see it's a calendar page. So you see some are number and some are picture. So this is completely a representation of plurilingualism. You can see the numbers and also all those activities on which day, what they did. You can say one person is, so on that day he was killed. And you say someone is holding like that. So that was a protest day. So this is how they came up with this calendar. And there was another very interesting innovation that was they started this movement in July and it ended in 5th August. But the Gen Z, the protester, they said it's not August. Unless and until this movement ends, we will call this time as July. So July 31, July 32, July 33, July 36. So this was really, really very, very innovative, we found, and they used the excellent way of plurilingualism. And also, if you go next, this is the last one I'm going to show you. You see, this is Arabic and also Bangla, and also you see a combination of calligraphy and our way of writing. And in this picture, you can see like all the religious symbols are together. So this movement actually, so inclusivity. So with the plurilingualism, inclusivity, students' agency, and also the political, praxis, and what they did, that they toppled up the autocratic government after 16 years by only, 36 days of movement. So it's unprecedented in history, and we are really, really proud to be a part of that history and movement online, and of course through this research. Thank you so much.